Modern agriculture has given us the safest, the most affordable, and the most plentiful food supply in the history of our species. But with our global population growing at current rates, it's been estimated that we will have to produce more food in the next 30 years than we have in the entire history of humanity. The biggest threats to face our species are things like climate change, biodiversity loss, and soil loss. But there is one group of people who can save us from that future: farmers. So I'm on a journey into the future of our food. Oh, miracle! Amazing! To witness for myself what the best and brightest minds are doing.
Everybody wants a fix. Well, the fix is nature itself.
To avert the imminent food security crisis.
We need to start to think now in order to solve the problem that we'll have in the future.
I'll question received wisdom. Why not just get rid of the cows? And interrogate how our food supply chains can respond to unparalleled events like the COVID-19 pandemic.
Technology is going to have an extraordinarily large part to play in the food chain, and I'm really excited about it.
Wow, look at this. So here's what I want to know. If we could radically rethink how we treat our land, what we grow, and how we produce it, if we could not just change our food system, but our whole planet for the better. Of all the inputs needed by agriculture, it's this one, water, that's far and away the most important. But farmers' relationship with this precious resource is becoming increasingly complicated, and that's largely down to the effects of climate change. Extreme weather events mean farmers now frequently have to contend with either too much water or too little. In some parts of the world, it's leading to entire communities migrating in search of a steady water supply for their crops. So can we rethink how we use our water? For the protection of both our farms and our climate. I'm beginning with a crop that, while fundamental to feeding us, is causing our planet enormous problems. Paddy fields as far as the eye can see, and all of it flooded in water. And that's because if you want to grow a single kilo of rice, you're going to first need up to 5,000 litres of water. That is just absolutely astonishing. 70% of the world's fresh water is used in agriculture, and rice accounts for over a third of that. To keep these thirsty rice plants happy, humans have flooded vast areas of the world to create artificial wetlands. And the problem isn't just the amount of water this crop uses, but the bacteria that live in this flooded soil are constantly producing methane, swamp gas, a massive greenhouse gas. In fact, 20% of all methane on the planet comes from paddy fields, and rice is the #1 crop for greenhouse gas emissions. Agronomist Michele Conte helps manage La Fagiana farm in one of Italy's biggest rice-growing regions. Whoa, so we're stood in a paddy field. I've got water almost up to my knees.
Yeah, there is 15 centimeters of water over here. For irrigate 1 hectare of rice, we must use around 25,000 cubic meters per hectare. And also another function, water control the weeds.
Rice has all these unusual characteristics. It means even if flooded, it can still just grow above that. And lots of weeds can't do that, so it's a really efficient means of just quashing them all.
Yeah.
For decades, these fields have been flooded using water from a local river transported via a network of canals. But now they've decided to trial a dramatically different system.
Now I want to show you the new technique that we are using in order to grow rice.
Okay. I was so excited. I've read about it, but never seen it. With the help of water technology specialists Netafim, they've installed a drip irrigation system on 12 hectares.
Come, James, I show you our new technique. This is the drip irrigated pipeline that is with these drippers that give exactly the quantity of water that we need in order to complete the growing cycle of this plant.
Clever technology creates a labyrinth within the pipeline, allowing a uniform distribution of water to travel along vast lengths, stretching hundreds of meters. So this field isn't flooded, but it definitely feels squelchy underfoot. There's still a lot of water.
Yeah, a lot of water, but less compared with the flooding situation.
How much less?
I think that we are arriving to save around 70% of water.
That's astonishing.
Yeah.
Such a big difference. The plants are watered at the roots daily, and weeds are suppressed using conventional herbicide techniques. Not flooding the fields means methane emissions could be virtually stopped.
Water is becoming every year more important. So in order to develop a new technique, we need to start to think now in order to solve the problem that we'll have in the future.
Sat right here, the paddy fields of northern Italy can seem absolutely vast. 50% of all the rice in Europe is produced here. But they're just a drop in the ocean when you compare it to the scale of somewhere like India. Adopting the technology there could be a game changer for the planet. And that's exactly what's happening. In southern India, where they're suffering acute water shortages due to changes in monsoon rains, the state is subsidizing drip irrigation for rice farmers.
Right now, 54% of the Indian region are having very high water stress. At the same time, we need to produce food for the increasing population. So we need to adopt the modern technology. We need to give the water to the plant, not to the soil. That is the first and foremost important rule we need to adopt.
But it's not the only way that Indian farmers are trying to make rice more water and more climate friendly. Farmer Ravichandran is using a method called the System of Rice Intensification, SRI for short, which not only uses less fresh water, but also improves yield.
See, many farmers, because of water scarcity, they have started giving up rice cultivation itself, because thinking that it is a water guzzler. It is not so. It's a myth. In SRI, we don't irrigate the field quite often. As and when it is needed, we call it alternate wetting and drying method.
Ravichandran pumps fresh water onto the fields intermittently, rather than continuously flooding them like paddies.
We use 30 to 40% less water.
Rotating wet and dry periods also means the plant roots get more oxygen, which helps them thrive. And planting young single rice seedlings wider apart means extra space for canopy and root growth, producing bigger, healthier plants.
You can see the precision planting. In the conventional method, in 1 square meter, we get about 66 plants, 50 to 66 plants. Whereas in the SRI, we get about, we transplant about 16 plants per square meter.
Mechanical weeders also aerate the soil, allowing it to absorb and retain more water. Remarkably, the SRI method appears to be producing more rice, even though it uses fewer plants and less water.
These are all very trained laborers. It needs meticulous planning and the perfect placement of the seedling. It justifies the payment of higher wages for these laborers.
If paddy field alternatives like SRI or drip irrigation were rolled out across the globe, the water savings could be immense, and the reduction in greenhouse gas game-changing. Growing our food requires lots of fresh water. But climate change is making this vital resource increasingly unpredictable. regularly faced with either drought or deluge, many farmers around the world rely on groundwater as a dependable source for irrigating their crops. However, our growing population means that demand is outstripping supply. But could there be a way for farmers to recharge these vital water resources and prevent the world's wells from running dry? Don, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine. Don Cameron is a farm manager in California's Central Valley, a region that produces a quarter of the USA's food and relies mostly on water pumped from underground to irrigate the crops. And it's fast running out.
I've been farming here for 40 years and have seen our groundwater level drop about 1 foot per year, and realized that we needed to take action to mitigate the problem.
To do so, Don is trying to turn what would normally be a problem into a solution. Rising temperatures have meant that each year the snowpack on the California mountains is melting sooner and causing floods. Rather than see it wasted, Don is attempting to top up the natural underground aquifers.
We take water that normally flows by our ranch, that's floodwater, that causes problems downstream with flooding and eventually ends up in the ocean and is lost to agriculture. And we divert it and bring it onto our farmland. We flooded this field with about 1.5 feet of water for a period of several months to build up our groundwater here. This is our high water mark where we actually did the flooding here. We were a little nervous. We didn't know whether we were going to kill the trees, but we felt it was a wise use of water, and we know how important water is long term, but we took a chance. These trees are healthy. They have a nice crop this year again too, so we know we didn't harm them.
A multi-million-pound infrastructure has been constructed to divert the floodwater to where it can then be soaked through the soil to the aquifers below.
We know that in our general region here, that we can store up to 2 million acre-feet of water, which is twice as large as the largest dam can hold in our region. So the potential is really huge.
Don's pioneering work has proved inspirational. Replenishing groundwater supplies is now a focus for farmers not just in California, but around the world, where new projects are underway to capture excess water in times of flood and monsoon so it can be drawn on when drought hits. But farmers' relationship with water isn't as simple as having either too much or too little. Drought and rising sea levels is causing more and more land to become saline or salty, and that's a threat to our global food security.
Plants just really don't like salty water, the vast majority of them. And that's because plants are basically made up of cells that are big water balloons, absolutely packed full of hydration. And when there's a saltier layer on the outside, it basically sucks them dry, causing their cells to collapse. Just like if you were to cut vegetables and sprinkle some salt on them, you notice they get all dry and wrinkly. That's what happens with living plants in a field. They absolutely hate it.
But some farmers simply can't avoid it. David Hoyle's land is low-lying and a stone's throw from the sea.
The climate is changing. We seem to get times where we get massive downpours of rain, and then we get prolonged dry periods. So what we need to do is start harvesting and collecting rain when it comes for times when it doesn't come. We're below sea level, so a lot of our ditch water is actually quite saline.
But David is among a group of farmers around the world that are experimenting with saline agriculture, changing the way they farm to embrace the salt.
What we're looking at is where we can use more salty water to supplement the fresher rainwater to irrigate our crops with. You see in the North Sea, just over there, there's a massive amount of water available to us. If we can be smarter with it being able to use and harness some of that water, yeah, that'd be quite exciting.
But plants hate salt water. They find it so difficult to grow for a different range of reasons. How are you able to use that? What works?
So at the moment we irrigate what's called overhead irrigation. So we spray or have like a giant sprinkler putting the water onto the crop. If we use salty water, as you mentioned, they hate it. That might damage the canopy, might burn the leaves, scorch the leaves. So what we're looking at is other methods like trickle irrigation. It's on a tape and a little drip of water comes out of that tape and it's below the surface. So we would put the trickle tape 5 centimetres below the surface of the potatoes here, and the water would permeate through. So it never actually touches the leaf of the crop.
So the roots are more resistant than their canopy?
That's what we're hoping.
Okay.
So we're thinking if we don't scorch the canopy we need for photosynthesis, for the plant to leave, if we can get around not scorching that off, can we still give some water to the roots? And is some water, even though it's a bit salty, better than no water at all?
David is working with Dr. Ian Gould from the University of Lincoln to identify which crops are more salt tolerant and to test just how much they can handle.
We've got an irrigation experiment where we're irrigating potatoes with different levels of salts, and we're constantly monitoring. We're monitoring the yield of the crop, whether there's any quality issues with the crop, but also in the soil. We're making sure that whatever we do isn't leaving a lasting legacy in the soil by damaging the microbial aspects of the soil or the soil structure. But we need to know how much we can get away with, basically, and salinity is a problem. And we're just looking at ways to adapt to it because we're kind of faced with increasing levels around the water in this part of the world.
To work out exactly how much salt soil and crop can take, 5 10-square-meter plots were irrigated with water of varying saline levels, from rainwater to the saltiest ditch on the farm. And the spuds are about to be dug up for the first time.
Look at that, just beneath the surface, buried treasure. Looking pretty good as well, because I think this is one of the highest salinity plots. And this is so important because it's not just about yield and seeing how you can get more out of less. It's also about making sure the quality is the same. There's no point in growing a product that no one wants to buy and no one wants to eat.
While there's still plenty of scientific analysis to be done with the crop and the soil, the first test will be a little bit more basic.
So let me just get this clear. Neither of you has ever tasted the potatoes as part of this experiment.
No, not yet.
Cutting edge chip-related science. That's my favorite type of science. I'm gonna go for the lowest salt, see if I can get a baseline.
Yeah, that was no salt.
Yep, very good. I'll take a tray of those any day. And going in.
So that is the 4,000, so that's the saltiest water we've put on it.
If you weren't to have told me, I wouldn't have noticed the difference.
No. We're going to go back and get the whole results before we make too many assumptions.
Okay, you do your stats, I'll eat the chips. I think that's a good deal.
Good deal.
20% of the world's irrigated land is already thought to be affected by salty soils. And with sea levels predicted to rise by up to 2 meters by the end of the century, saltwater farming is being taken very seriously, with large-scale experiments underway around the world. But what more could be done in areas that have little or no water at all? Biologist Professor Jill Farrant believes she may have the answer.
Climate change is for real. I think we should all be very aware of that. And it's going to bring different issues to different countries. But in South Africa, my country, what the greatest prediction is that in 20 years' time, we will be a desert. That's a big problem because there's very little irrigation and we rely entirely on rainfall.
Jill is trying to harness the power of so-called resurrection plants, species that can lose 95% of their water and remain in a dry state for years, but when it rains, spring back to life.
My work is to be able to understand how these plants can lose water and not die, and to transfer that genetic and biochemical potential to crops so that they too can lose water and not die.
Jill and her team at the University of Cape Town have discovered that food crops also have the same potential, because they share the same core genes, which allows them as seeds to lie dormant until watered.
So now that we understand that every crop has these genes in the genome, the gene editing technique is going to be used to switch them on in leaves and roots under drought conditions where normally those genes would be silenced. Wheat, rice, and maize are up there as providing 75% of all food calories for everyone in the world. And sadly, all of those crops have been bred for food yield, compromising their stress ability. Because of our study on resurrection plants, what we're going to do with gene editing is to try and mimic that in a crop. If we don't make changes now, we're not going to be okay in 20 years' time.
Whether like Jill and her team, we create plants that need less water, or plants that drink salt water, or simply focus on managing what we have available, there's no getting away from the necessity of this essential ingredient in all of our food production.
Figuring out how to channel water to quench the thirst of the crops that we rely on is one of the earliest questions to face humanity. In fact, over thousands of years, we've come up with all sorts of incredibly innovative solutions to make that happen. And it's upon this that all of human civilization is still based. But in the next chapter of our planet's climate, we're going to have to really kick it up a notch, getting the maximum amount of productivity out of every drop. And the clock is ticking.